So welcome everyone, good morning. My name is James Walsh, I'm Head of Membership Engagement here at the PLSA. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this Policy Insights webinar on pensions dashboards, what schemes need to do. So one of the purposes of this series of webinars is to give you, our members, a sense of the policy work that my colleagues are doing behind the scenes, trying to influence the government, the regulator and so on your behalf. And you'll see that we're very well connected with everything that's going on the pensions dashboard. Indeed, we're going to be hearing in a few minutes' time from my colleague Nigel Peaple, who's our policy director. Nigel sits on the pensions dashboard program's steering group, bit of a mouthful there, and Nigel's going to give us the PLSA's perspective. We'll also hear from our pensions dashboards consultant, Richard Smith. He's going to really drill down, morning Richard, he's going to really drill down into the nitty-gritty of what schemes need to do. Before Nigel and Richard, we'll start with Chris Curry, who is principal of the pensions dashboard program. So Chris is the man who's leading the whole shooting match on the dashboard, so really knows what's going on. He's going to give us an overview of the state of play and the timetable ahead. So that's enough from me. We're going to get cracking with Chris Curry. Chris, good morning, welcome, over to you.
Thanks very much, James. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here again at another PLSA webinar. It's always a pleasure to come and speak to the PLSA members and also to listen to the PLSA members as well. It's very important that we hear from industry as well as telling industry what we're doing. This is very much a joint programme. I would like to give you just a brief introduction, I guess, for those that don't know too much about the Pensions Dashboard Programme as to who we are and what we're doing. A little bit about the timelines that we're trying to put into place for the next 12 to 18 months or so and beyond. And also a little bit about what we hope the industry will be able to do before you get into some of the detail of that from Richard later on. And also, very importantly, some contact details so you can get in touch with us and lots of different ways in which you can help us make sure that pensions dashboards work, not just for the consumer, but for the industry as well. If we can move on to the first slide, please. This is really, it's always worth, I think, taking a step back and thinking, what is it exactly that we want pensions dashboards to do? What is the point of pensions dashboards? And you can see the vision that we've got there. That's the bit on the right-hand side. I don't think the bit on the left-hand side of the screen is much of a vision, but it's about enabling individuals to access their pensions information online securely, which is really important, but equally important, all in one place. So there's like a one-stop shop, a starting point for people in their pensions information's journey. And hopefully by doing that, we think pensions dashboards will support better planning for retirement and hopefully increase people's financial well-being. So that's what we're trying to do with pensions dashboards, and it's really about bringing everything together in one place online so people can find it easily. Now that sounds quite straightforward to do. It's not that straightforward to do, as we'll find out. And if we move on to the next slide, I'll try to help explain exactly what it is that the Pensions Dashboards Programme is actually delivering. And it's very important that I should say right at the start, what we're not delivering is a pensions dashboard. That's actually being delivered by a number of other providers. There is one at the Money and Pension Service. I should say that the Pensions Dashboard Programme is done as part of the Money and Pension Service, but there's a separate part which is doing the MAPS Pensions Dashboard, as it were. And we expect there to be dashboards provided by a range of other providers as well. What we also don't do is hold or take or store any of the data involved in that, and that is maintained within the place that it currently is with pension schemes, pension providers, and the state pension. As you can see at the bottom of the diagram on your screen, what we're doing is actually building the infrastructure to allow the connections between the data in the current providers and the consumers through dashboards. That means there's some technology that we're doing around actually allowing individuals to find their data within the different parts of the pension system, but also some very important areas around identity. So we know that the right people find the right data and consent and authorization. So only the data that they want to see can be seen. And that in itself is all within a kind of framework where there's a lot of governance and regulation involved to ensure that the data is held and looked at securely, but also that what happens with the data that doesn't lead to any consumer detriment at all for individuals. So as you might expect, This is quite a joint approach. I guess we're working with a number of organisations in here. As I said, we're part of the Money and Pension Service. The policy development is done by the Department for Work and Pensions. So obviously, we work closely with them and the rest of central government. As this is a government programme, any of the work that we do also has to be authorised by Cabinet Office and the Treasury. There's regulatory involvement from the pensions regulator and the FCA. And obviously, we need the support and work very closely with the industry as partners in part of this to make sure that they are able to meet the needs of who is at the heart of all of the Pensions Dashboard Programme, which is the consumer, to make sure that they get the information that they can that will help them on their journey in getting better retirement outcomes going forward. So if you can move to the next slide, please. That's what we're doing. This will hopefully give you a bit of an idea about when we're likely to be doing it and a little bit more about how we're doing it as well. So this, for those of you who understand a lot about project management, will not be a surprise as a kind of fairly standard phase plan of what phases the programme is going to be going through. And what we've done and what we've published recently is a little bit more detail about exactly when we think we'll be going through these particular phases. So we started at the Money and Pension Service in 2019. I know there's been discussion and debate about dashboards from much further back than that, but we only really started working on this 2 years ago, as it were. And we spent a lot of time over the last 2 years putting in the foundations of the programme going forward. We're looking to actually move into the next phase where we can actually start developing and testing later this year. The key to doing that is actually identifying who the technology supplier is going to be, who's going to build that central architecture, the pension finder service. And we're currently running through the procurement exercise for that, and we're expecting to appoint a supplier to the programme in September of this year. And at that stage, we will then move into being able to start developing and testing some of that central architecture and using data to go through. For the industry here, some key dates. From 2023, there'll be some staged onboarding that will become mandatory. And I'll explain a little bit in a minute about how we're working on that and making sure that the industry is ready for how that happens. Before then, we are looking to be working with some members of the industry on a voluntary basis to do some testing to make sure that the system all works. And then at some point, once that staged onboarding has started and completed, so once we start to get all the pension providers that we need to hooked up to the pensions ecosystem, we will then at some point proceed into a business as usual. And at some point along there as well, we would reach what we call the dashboards available point, and that's when dashboards will become available to the public. But we only want to do that when we know we've got enough information and enough data on the dashboards for them to be useful to individuals. We don't want to release anything too early to disappoint individuals and maybe undermine the pensions dashboard programme before it really starts. So what does this mean for industry? If we could move on to the next slide, please. There's a lot, as I mentioned, that we're doing. We're working with a number of different partners, but I just want to focus on what we want to do with data providers, and that's pension schemes in effect at the moment. So I mentioned about the onboarding and when pension schemes will have to start providing data. We're currently undertaking a call for input that was released last month and runs through until early July, where we really want to hear from you, from the industry, about what it is that we're asking you to do and when we're asking you to do it, how feasible you think that is, what evidence you have for us as to whether you will be able to meet the timelines that are being suggested, or whether there are other factors that we haven't yet considered that need to be taken into account. And we're also publishing further information about the architecture to allow pension schemes to have a better understanding of exactly what it is that the system will do and what will happen with their data when they provide it into the system with us. Another important area is around retirement income. I'm sure we'll get questions on that, and that's something which we're working on throughout this year as part of an industry working group to get a better understanding of both what consumers understand and need in terms of getting information about their pensions, but also what's possible in terms of what the industry can provide and to what timescales. You'll see on the timeline a number of other points. We're expecting there to be consultation led by DWP about the regulatory framework. We will be providing further updates as soon as we can throughout the year in many different areas, including technical support to providers, and as I mentioned, working with voluntary providers, potentially from later this year and early next year. I think over the next 18 months to 2 years, there'll be plenty of information coming out from us, and we'll need to know plenty of information from yourselves, as well as that regulatory framework for pensions dashboards is established, and all leading up to staged onboarding starting from, we think, the spring or summer of 2023. That doesn't mean that you should wait until 2023 in order to start doing things. And again, Richard will come on to what it is concretely that you can do at the moment to help get ready for when you need to start providing information to the pensions dashboards program through legislation. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Just a quick update on where we are. So as I mentioned, we published our latest update report last month. Please do have a look at it if you haven't already read it. It gives a very good overview of where we are and what's coming next. I mentioned that we've done a lot of work on the procurement phase, and we are actually now, as I mentioned, in the middle of appointing a supplier, so that from September we'll be able to get into more technical work with the industry and actual start construction of the service itself. I mentioned the call for input on staging as well, and I would reiterate we want to hear from as many providers as possible with as much information as possible to make sure that we get that staging timeline right going forward. And we're doing a lot of work as well around the identity service. This is a very important part of the programme to make sure that the right people get the right information done in a safe and secure way, and that the industry is assured that the information they're providing is going to the right people. What's coming up next over the summer? As I mentioned, we're going to be awarding contracts for a supplier, and we're also going to be looking for our identity service supplier, as well as providing the updates on estimated retirement income and continually working with the industry to ensure that everyone is as up to date as possible and we've got the best information possible. If we can move on to the next slide, please. One of the ways in which we've been trying to keep the industry abreast of what's happening, and we started this and published it alongside our progress update report recently, is a data providers hub. So again, if you haven't had a chance to look, it's on the website, please do. You can see the address is there on the screen, and we can circulate it later. But it starts to give more information about the key dates, what kind of steps you're going to have to undertake in order to connect up to the pensions dashboards, reiterates the data standards which were published last December, talks about the staging call for input. Everything that you would hope to find about pensions dashboards is ideally on that providers hub. If there isn't anything there, or there's something there that you would like to see but we haven't yet got it, please do let us know, and we'd like to try and add it on. This has been a very whistle-stop tour of where we are at the moment on the pensions dashboards program. I'm sure there are lots of questions that will come out. If we can move on to the final slide, please. One of the things I've mentioned a lot today is about we want to hear from you as much as we want to be talking to you about what we're doing. And there's a number of ways in which you can get involved on the screen. Please do sign up for the monthly newsletter. Please do look at the website, and in particular at the provider hub, and also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for the latest updates. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Chris. That's got us off to a great start, and you've got a very busy agenda. I can see you've already prompted some questions that are coming in, and you did mention about ensuring that the data that scheme supplies goes to the right place, the right people. Matthew Trueblood is asking, will making our data available to the dashboard be safe from a GDPR angle? Will the legislation give us a safe harbour against complaint or other action? What's your view on that?
Yes, that's a very important part of both part of the technical architecture that's being constructed, but also the governance system that we're putting in place around pensions dashboards. So the way in which the architecture works means, as I stated earlier, that the data is not actually stored anywhere at all, and is only actually seen by the individual themselves or whoever they give authority or consent to see. And there's a positive consent element to what we're doing, which is really important for part of that GDPR purposes. So the only person who can see that data is either the owner of that data himself or herself, the individual, or someone that they've given delegated authority to. So that does mean that we are pretty certain that it is all GDPR compliant. But there is also, of course, a lot of work going on around things like a liability model for the pensions dashboard program, because we know with the best will in the world, sometimes things don't go exactly as they're planned. Now, there are lots of safeguards and precautions and redress out there at the moment, but we're doing very actively a lot of work at the moment to look at exactly where those gaps may appear and who should be liable to do that. So we will have a very comprehensive liability framework. We've had to do a lot of work on that already in order to start with the supplier process, and you can rest assured that that will be something that's kind of very high alongside consumer protection to avoid any need to get onto the liability model in the first place, and be working on throughout the rest of this year and beyond.
Okay, thanks, Chris. That's really good to hear. Okay, well, let's move on to my colleague Nigel Peaple. Nigel, you're going to give us the PLSA's perspective on dashboards.
Yes, thanks, James. Yes, I shall be brief because really today is all about helping schemes understand what do they need to do next. But the broader context of this, if we could have the next slide, please, is that PLSA has a kind of a three-pronged approach to it, which is supporting savers, looking after them, supporting schemes, helping them comply, but also representing their interests, and our support for the policy. If I could have the next slide, please. So so we do support the policy. Our members are rightly constantly telling us that people are not very engaged with pension saving, and they lose their pension pots, and they don't know how much money they've got. So we think it's a good thing, especially as people have so many jobs and pensions, and even more now with AE, that there is such a thing as a pensions dashboard. But we think it's also very, very important that it works for the saver and the consumer, and we're realistic about their expectations and needs. So we think it's particularly important to be able to locate their pensions, and we're really pleased the government listened to us and has signed up to putting the state pension on there. The reason why we think that's so important, as many of you will know, is the data shows that for most people, the state pension makes up the largest element of their retirement income. So any grasp about your pension income, you really need to know the state pension as part of that. We think having dashboards will improve awareness of pension saving and will create a greater sense of ownership. So just the things the government wanted to do through this policy. And we are hopeful yet that from the dashboards, there'll be some signposting to other useful tools like the retirement living standards. But equally, we recognise that on the kind of landing page of dashboards, it's really important to keep it simple, because that will already be quite enough for everyone to get their heads around. Now, in order that this thing works for savers, absolutely important is consumer protection, and not just, but very importantly, making sure the data is secure, but also about ensuring that people do not make bad, if possible, trying to discourage the risk, trying to reduce the risk of people making bad decisions on the basis of information they see on the dashboard, possibly due to people whispering in their ear about what they should do. And therefore, we're pleased that there's going to be a lot of focus on the regulatory regime for dashboards themselves and the way in which information will be displayed. And then there is this issue about how will information be displayed. We think it's very important that it's simple, but also that it's done in the same way. It's not absolutely sure, that's not quite settled yet. It's something we're active on. Next slide, please. Now, obviously, we're all about our member schemes, as well as our mission of helping everyone have a better income in retirement. So we're very, very focused on trying to look after pension schemes' interests in this. And so we're doing various things. In particular, we're trying to pump out educational material and events, and we're really, really grateful to Chris and his team. Chris has spoken quite a few times with the PLSA on this topic, and I think, and there's another one coming up soon, and there's more to be done on that. So information, education, there's a certain amount of collaboration with some of the other industry bodies in this space, in particular PASA and ABI. Dashboards applies to all pensions pretty much, so it's really important we all work together on that. And there's some active work going on right now about the data matching challenges, and I imagine we'll be ramping that up in the very near future. But there's also a sort of policy angle on this as well, which is about making sure that the requirements are achievable and feasible for pension schemes. And Chris has already mentioned the call for input, and we will be doing a response to that hopefully by its deadline of the 9th of July. We've already had some initial discussions, both with our policy board last week and earlier this week with our special dashboards coordination group, taking soundings of what they think is achievable, whether they're comfortable with the timeline suggested, whether they're comfortable with the approach taken to showing the view data, the data showing how much money people have in their pensions. And we're getting an initial steer from them, but we'll be doing more. We'll be surveying our membership a little bit later on this over the next few weeks. There are other surveys are available, as they like to say. PASA's doing a survey on its particular perspective on this. And we'll be talking to our policy committee and again to our policy board over the next few weeks. That's an awful lot of governance, but it does mean we reach out to, frankly, between 100 and 400 schemes, which I think is really necessary and important, because this is, a big challenge for the sector. Over the next slide, please. And I've already mentioned that, yeah, we do, of course, support the policy, but we're not so naive to think that the dashboards will somehow transform members' engagement and understanding of pension savings. It's a necessary part. So there's a bunch of other things that PLSA is active on. And in particular, I'd start at the bottom of that list in the slide there. We continue to argue that automatic enrolment contributions are too low at the moment, and they do need to go up, certainly for average earners and above. And our policy is that it should be 12% by 2030, probably the back end of this decade, especially given the pandemic. But that's a really important aspect of making sure everyone has a better income. We've got our retirement living standards, which I'm really pleased. Many schemes have used, are using and adopting. We know there's some exciting tools being developed on those. And between ourselves, we're planning to establish a special award for the best and most innovative use of retirement living standards. We're also planning shortly to provide some guidance to schemes about just what can employers and schemes tell their members and their savers, which is within the regulatory envelope, where they're not formally offering advice, but they are nevertheless able to give quite a good steer, dare I go that far, quite a good steer and a nudge to people to try and help them make better decisions, as well as our work on DC accumulation, small pots. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. The second one I think you've had this morning, but it's really, as I said, I want to sort of step aside and leave the space clear for Richard in particular to set out in much more detail what it is that schemes need to do to prepare. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, let's move on to Richard then, who's going to really get down into the practical detail of what schemes need to do. Richard, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Just before we dive into my section, 3 really quick but important words of context or introduction. I think a number of you may know I had the absolute honour of working with Chris on the Dashboards programme last year, leading the team developing the data standards. So this is the definition of the flow of data from all of your pension schemes in an industry standard way, so that individuals can see them on their chosen dashboard. I'd have to say the main feedback I got from industry on that is, oh, well, I don't envy you that job. But it was very, very exciting and I say honour to do that. But as a pensions practitioner, not a government policymaker, I was a bit of a fish out of water there. So I've rolled off now and now helping industry. And that's the second point of introduction. And you'll see on this slide here, I'm also helping the PASA dashboards working group. And I think my perception from dashboards on the programme last year is that they're going to bring our pensions world together in a way that has possibly never happened before, as Nigel's indicated, with all the trade associations having to work together in concert. And this comes to the third point of introduction. Why? Because the consumer, the individual, brings together pensions. And this is something we don't always do in our pensions world. We tend to think about our members, but of course our members, particularly our deferreds, have also got other pensions savings. And, you know, we know from international experience, it's the Generation X's are going to be using, you know, we'd love it if 20 and 30-year-olds were interested in pensions. It's never going to happen. You know, it's the international dashboards start using in a big time at about age 56, and particularly in early 60s. Those are the Generation X who've got deferred DB from the 1980s. They've got some DC, possibly in Master Trust, possibly in GPP. We all know that. Most people neither know nor care. For them, it's all just money when I'm older. And we look at the Dutch dashboard, what people are saying, big research piece done there, is they want to see one retirement income figure. They don't really want to look at 4 statements. We know on average people have 4 pensions in this country, and they don't really want to look at 4 statements. They want to see one income figure. In fact, in the Netherlands, people are starting to look at their individual scheme statements less and going to the dashboard, because that's the one place they can actually see what they might get in retirement. So it's a really, really beneficial thing. If we can get the same level of success in the UK, I think we have an opportunity as an industry to do something really wonderful for the 25 million working age adults in this country who've got pensions. So with focusing on the saver, with government doing their bit and industry, us doing our bit, that is not to diminish the scale of the challenge. So that's what this session is going to be. And hopefully by now I've got control of the slides to tell you what I'm actually going to talk about. 3 things. One, I'm going to tell you what you're going to need to do, boil it down to 3 things. Obviously, it's going to be more complicated than that, but let's boil it down to 3 core things. That's the what. The second bullet is the when. Chris has mentioned there's a staging call for input out, so a bit of an idea about, well, what might it feel like as a scheme to actually implement this? And then we're going to, third thing, zoom back into, okay, so what do I have to do right now? Alicia on the team here at PLSA said, oh, Richard, that's good. That looks really actionable. Shouldn't you be talking about it a bit earlier? So I'll highlight the points here, but it'll make more sense if at the end, but just in case you have to dial off or something goes wrong with the tech, here's what you need to do now. Staging call for input. This is the rollout of data. I'd really urge everybody, even if you've only got 10 minutes to feed in your thoughts, and I'm going to tell you all the different ways in which you can do that. Secondly, guidance. There's a load of stuff on the PDP website that Chris has talked about. There's also PASA dashboard guidance. You might say, what have I got? Why 2? What the PASA dashboard guidance can do, and other materials that are going to be coming from PLSA and other bodies, can make it contextual. One thing that Chris has got to do on the program is talk to the whole of the pensions universe, which we know is vast. You know, an LGPS fund is really nothing like a personal pension provider. But again, from the saver's point of view, it's all the same. It's all just money when I'm older. So individual guidance can particularize it. If you look at that PASA guidance, what it'll tell you to do is the next 3 bullets, which is talk to your providers, your administrator, or if you've got in-house admin to your software provider, I'm going to be telling you what to ask them. And I think it's got to happen quite soon. It'll also say, is your personal data okay? Are you going to be able to match dashboard users to your pensions? I'm going to be talking about that in detail. And thirdly, have you got accrued benefits for all your on all your records? Those are things that need to happen now, and I'll be explaining more of those and reiterating those 5 actions as we go through. So the first thing, what are the 3 things everyone's got to do? Chris, I've seen on your website you've got rather more on the technical detail, but I was very pleased that it actually aligns to these 3. We wanted 3 verbs. I like things in 3s, like kids and biscuits. So we went for 3 verbs that began with C: connect, compare, convey. I'm going to talk about what those mean. Connect. So you are going to need to connect your pension schemes to the central digital architecture that Chris's team is procuring. And of course, that will involve fully testing that connection. What does that mean? Well, it's going to be a technology solution between your scheme's admin function and the central architecture. When have you got to do it? How often? Well, it's a one-off task. You've got to get it set up, and you've got to do that by the date that the law says you've got to do it by, which let's call it a statutory staging date for your scheme. We'll talk more about that in a minute. I find pictures are by far the easiest way to explain this stuff. Again, I was really pleased that Chris put up this diagram because I use it throughout as well. Dashboards at the top, central architecture in the middle, our world, schemes at the bottom. So you can see there's just 4 purple bits, but of course there's there's thousands of pension schemes and providers, aren't there? The red circles really show this technical connection I'm talking about. The insight we're getting from industry is, well, my administrator is going to do that, aren't they? Or my software provider, if I've got in-house admin, they're going to do that for me, aren't they? Well, yes, the answer is probably they are, but it's likely, well, it's almost certain that you will need to extend your contract with your TPA or software provider to add these additional services. Let me just paint the picture of that. You're not going to want dashboard find requests coming to your production data service. Well, it's unlikely that you will. So it's likely there will be another copy of the data. How frequently is that data going to be passed across? Is that going to be a nightly refresh? Is it going to be monthly? How does that sit? Then as well, I think we've already had a question on GDPR. How are we going to ensure that that copy database is always going to wash our face in terms of GDPR requirements? And then this thing about liability, suppose Richard logs onto a dashboard, but he doesn't find his pension. We're going to talk about why that might happen in a minute. Whose problem is that? Is that my administrator's problem, or is that me as trustee body, because the duty is falling on me as trustee? So I think there's quite a bit more to come in the contract terms for this new service, this integrated service provider, ISP service, which is going to be an add-on to your existing TPA or software provider service. Really, this is the sort of thing you need to be talking to your admin or software provider about. Second C, compare. Okay, so we've connected. You need to compare all of your member records to incoming find requests. So find requests come from the dashboard central architecture to say, Richard's looking for his pensions. What does it mean? It means you've got to digitally compare the personal details of all your records to those find requests. When have you got to do it? Well, all the time, 24/7, 365, forever. And when have you got to do it from? Well, you've got to do it from once your connection's up and running, from your statutory staging date. Again, the picture, these purple lines, I love these. These are snapshots, aren't they, Chris, from your excellent introductory videos. I would say to everybody, go and watch Chris's team's 3 introductory videos. The links were in the invite for this webinar. Great way to understand it. The purple lines come down. So Richard logs onto a dashboard, his chosen dashboard. Please, can no one ever say the dashboard? The dashboard doesn't exist. It's Richard's or whoever's chosen pensions dashboard. There's going to be many. And the find request goes through the central architecture and goes to every single pension scheme and says, have you got a pension for Richard? And here, red circle, every scheme needs to decide, what are we going to match on? Let's look at matching on, well, does the national insurance number, date of birth and name match? Yes, it does. Okay, we got a pension. Let's pass it back for Richard to view. What are you individually as each pension scheme going to match on? What we had when we did a call for input on data last year on the programme was, well, we really want government to tell us. Government is never going to tell you what to match on. 2 reasons. One, it doesn't know how every pension scheme and provider holds its data, so that wouldn't be appropriate to opine. But secondly, if it did, if it said every scheme and provider must match on Nino, Dob and name, that's mandating that every scheme and provider must have those, and that might not be appropriate to do. What we're hearing is that industry wants industry-wide matching standards, and Nigel's already alluded to this. It's likely that the trade bodies need to get together to come up with some matching standards. I'm going to talk more about that in a little while. Also, partial matches. You're going to have the situation, we all know it, where Nino and Dob matches, but surname doesn't. We heard a story, didn't we, Nigel, on one of our recent meetings. One of our members was helping one of his sisters with her pensions, her 8 pensions, and only 1 of the 8 had an up-to-date surname. And I'm reminded of, if you're going to match on postcode, I'm reminding of the ABI's research from exactly a year ago. Only 1 in 25 people tells their pension scheme or provider when they move house. Of course, we all know this because whenever we send anything out, we get loads of gonaways, don't we? But postcode is going to be a really hard thing to match on. So lots to think about. How many find requests are you all going to get? I wish we had interactive and we could ask questions here. A lot of questions about volumes. So Chris, you've put out 6 to 9 million, haven't you, in the update last month? So I think that might be startup. On the right-hand side, Origo, they were one of the organisations that built the prototype back in 2017. They did some analysis in 2017, and they thought, well, it might be 13 to 15 million a year. I've been phoning around the international dashboards to see what their actual experience was. So that's Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden. What's really interesting, there's a very consistent percentage of the population. It's nearly always 25 to 33%. Now, we have to be a little bit careful here because the Belgium and Danish dashboards are aimed at pensioners, but the Dutch and Swedish ones aren't, and the UK one isn't. So just be really, really clear, this is for working age people in the UK. Now, I know, Chris, on your steering group, you've got a number of people, I think you put it in your progress update report, didn't you, who think pensions actually should be on there. Now, I can see the point of that really, because particularly when you're going to start bringing some pensions into payment and others are still building up, you might want to see them all. So I think in time, we might need to broaden it for pensions, but you have to start somewhere. So initially, it's just actives and deferreds, people who are still building up pensions. So the total adult population in this country currently is 52 million, but working age population, which is our target market, is 40 million. And not all of those have got pensions. So actually only 25 million working age adults have got pensions building up. But anyway, if we did get to about a quarter of the adult population or a third of the working age population, it could be about 13. I think Origo could be right. Maybe that's once it's fully launched, if we get the same level of success and penetration that the international dashboards have got. If Chris is right and it's 6 million a year, that's 16,000 a day, 365. If it's the higher end, 30 million, that's 35,000 a day. Now, bear in mind, that's unique users, that's not fines. The international experience is people come on average twice a year. So so that actually could be double, but let's just go with somewhere between 6 million and 30 million, or 16,000, 35,000 a day. That's between 16 and 35,000 find requests hitting every scheme every day. Or in other words, a find request will hit your scheme every 2 to 5 seconds continually forever. I'll just leave that hanging. I'm not sure every trustee body has understood this yet. Of course, it won't be every 2 seconds. That's assuming people are going to be logging on to dashboards all through the night. It will be peaks and troughs. So lots of performance issues to be thought about. This is why it has to be digital. It'll be going on in the background all the time. You won't even know, but it's going to be there the whole time. Let's press on. The third C, convey. Not the best verb, but actually it does get a point across the point that Chris made, that no data stays. So you've got to convey the correct information. If you make a positive match on the right-hand side, when you've made a positive match, yes, I've got a pension for Richard, and I'm certain it's him. Nino, Dob, and name, if those are the 3 elements I choose to match on, actually match. I'm sure it's him. I'm going to return the information. What information? Well, it's the statutory information in a statutory response time as defined in the data standards that we did last year. When have you got to do it? When you make a positive match from your staging date. So it's important. Oh, here's the picture again. These purple lines, they are going back. Important to say, it's quite deliberate that those purple lines don't go through the finder service. The data is outside of the digital architecture. It just goes to Richard to look at on his dashboard. And when he logs off, it's gone. Okay, I think a number of folk in the pension industry still think you've got to send all your data to a central sort of mega database. Not true. So this is the architecture that's been developed, which is going to be safe so that a dashboard user logs on, sees data, logs off, and it's gone. What you've got to return is already defined. The data standards were published in December. There's a little picture of it. What's in there? Well, there's 2 things. The find request, the personal data is the find request data that's going to come to you to say, this is what you can match on. And then the view data is what you pass back. Really important bold italic point there. The pension income amounts that people are going to see, as Chris has already alluded, there's work going that because they've not really been fully tested for understandability. Here is the summary of the data items. I looked at this, Chris, and I thought, did we spend a year doing that? It's like, what are we doing? But the point is that this has to work across 40,000 pension schemes of all different types, from central government, local government, private sector DB, master trusts, personal pension providers, SIPs, you know, everything. It's bringing all of the pensions world together. What do we want to say about this? So the find data, those top items will be coming to you. I think the analogy I've used here, that's a menu. So this thing about has every scheme got to decide what they match on? Well, yes, that's the current thing. So it's like everybody choosing their own meal. But I think what we're saying is we probably need, what do the French call it? Like a set menu. Yeah, there's going to be 3. So for example, maybe date of birth, surname, and national insurance number is one set of things you can match on. But coming to GDPR, I think we need to get trustee bodies comfortable with their legal advisors that if I match on those 3, that is in fact a safe match. I think it's quite a bit more to come out on what is a safe match. I know that word's come out already on a question from Matthew. And whenever we do these webinars, the first word that comes out always is it going to be safe? The view data goes back really quickly. Administrative data is, well, who's it with? What's the scheme? What's the provider? And how do I get in touch? You'd think that would be simple. Not so. I've got 5 deferred pensions. None of them have got the same name as when I was active in them. We all know that because of churn. You know, there's corporate churn, but there's also provider side churn, isn't there? Now, we all know that as pensions nerds, but most people won't recognize. So actually showing a scheme name or provider name that people resonate with is going to be a challenge. Right down at the bottom, further information, government wants URLs to things like cost and charges. I'd love to know, has anyone ever clicked on a URL to go and find out charge information? I'd love to see that data. I don't know if they ever have, but government wants that stuff to be sent back. And then the middle bit is what we're really talking about, this value data, an estimate of the annual income that the individual might receive. And this is where Nigel put up the point that the PLSA's position should be the income built up to date, not projected into the uncertain future, but we'll talk more about that. Shall I pause there, James, for a second?
Absolutely, Richard. Thank you. And you're prompting quite a few questions. I mean, one from me. About these data standards, how confident are you that schemes are going to be able to meet these standards? I mean, what's the scale of that task in practice?
So maybe break that down into the find and the view. Okay, so when we think about data, we need to think about two completely different beasts in terms of data, which is personal data. Can I even find the blessed thing? You know, can I confidently do a match? And the intelligence we have, and I think we all know this as people involved in pensions admin and pensions management, is that personal data isn't really, we're not really in control of its quality, because who does it come from? It comes from our sponsoring employers. And particularly if we're a large master trust, possibly many thousands of micro employers. And we do know that employers don't always send the best quality personal data. It's different in different setups. If you're in-house, you can sometimes walk round to payroll and say, oh, can I just check the surname on that new member? Well, you can't now because of COVID, but you know, so if you've got an in-house admin and payroll setup, that's different. It's vastly different if you're a commercial pension provider or master trust or whatever. So it varies. So personal data, we need to understand. Now, pensions regulator has had record keeping guidance for years, hasn't it, on common data? You know, this is very, very similar to the common data. But of course, the common data checks for the presence. So yes, your system provider could run a routine for you. He said, yeah, on 99.4% of your records, you've got a postcode or you've got a surname in place. They cannot tell you if that is the accurate postcode or the accurate surname. And as we know, as you said, 1 in 25 people tells people when they move house, it's not going to be accurate. So I think there's a task for industry to do to work on how it can understand not just the presence, but the accuracy of its personal data. If the data is not, if the personal data is not accurate, then there's going to be these things false, a bit like COVID tests, false, there's negatives and false positives. Okay, a false negative is Richard's got a pension with us, but I can't match. And the fuzzy match or the partial match is, well, Nino and Dob match, but surname doesn't. So then what do I do? What I really want him to do, or her to do, if maybe she's changed her name, is get in touch with me and get the surname updated, so that then when they come back to their dashboard, it will be matched. So there's a question there. That's the false negative. But worse is a false positive. When I see another Richard Smith's dashboard on the pension on the dashboard that I'm logging into. So I think there's a lot for industry to understand about the scale of false negatives and false positives. Chris, we commissioned PwC to do some research, didn't we, last year? On this very question, and the line from that struck with me was a number of pension providers and administrators and system providers felt that the true extent of the accuracy of key identifier information like this will only really come to fruition when we connect. That's area of data 1, okay, can I even find the better thing? Area of data 2 is the view data. What do I pass back? And I think what I'd probably say is, well, yes, scheme name and contact details, probably not too hard, although as we said, you know, that may be interesting for the user experience. Like, I don't recognize that name. But passing back an amount that they can understand is going to be a real challenge. And I think we should probably come on to that a little bit in the wider discussion piece. Shall I press on with the when?
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, James. So when's it all going to happen? Scheme is going to have a statutory staging date. Actually, what came out, Chris, from your PDP webinar yesterday that Paul Noon was talking on, it might not be a date, it might be a window, and that's part of the call for input. I think that you're interested to hear. So it might not be you've got to do it on the 1st of April 2024. It might be you've got to do it by the 1st of April 2024. So I think it might not be a date, it might be a window. That's up for debate. But that's going to be set out in regulations. Do you remember with automatic enrolment, every employer had a staging date? It's going to be a similar sort of thing to that. So PDP's published this call for input on staging, as Chris says, last month. I'm going to talk about 3 highlights. It's really an essential read, and I really would advocate that people have a look at this and feedback their thoughts. I'm going to bring out 3 highlights, which is the concept of largest first, and this thing about the DAP, I'll tell you about that in a minute. The fact it breaks down the whole of the pensions universe into waves, and I'm going to drill into the wave 1, which is probably all of the people on the call today, which is what the regulator calls large schemes, which is 1,000 lives or 1,000 members or more. I'm going to look briefly at each of those. I love this table. This table is so exciting. Top row, there are 14 schemes in this country with over 1 million members. So obviously that's Nest, and Peaple's, Nest's got 10 million, hasn't it? And Peaple's got 5 million, and you've got NHS pension scheme in there and teachers pension scheme. So 14 schemes, which is a tiny fraction of schemes. It's 0.04% of schemes. They bring you over half of all active and deferreds. That's amazing, isn't it? And then go to the next row, go down to the 100,000 members. Okay, so that's 72 schemes. So there you've got things like, I don't know, universities pension scheme has got 300,000 members, for example. Again, you're still less than 1% of schemes. You're like 0.24% of schemes. But those 2 rows together bring you 82% of all pensions. It's amazing, isn't it? Then go right down to the bottom. You've got 28,000 micro schemes that bring that 80%, 81% of schemes, but bring you just the last 0.1% of memberships. Look at that graphically over on the right-hand side. The green is the memberships that ramps up really quick, and then the blue is the schemes. So we coined this term, didn't we, last year? I don't know whether I like. If you say it in English, the point at which you would make dashboards available to the public. That makes sense. So we just called it the dashboards available point, the DAP. It doesn't really work. I did look up actually on Wikipedia. I quite like this. A DAP is like an Urban Dictionary term for it's like a fist bump. It's like an expression of greeting or mutual respect. I quite like that. And it might stand for dignity and pride. So I like all of this. Yeah, I know. So it's the point at which we say, Britain, now log on to your dashboards. And can you see, I've made this up. Don't think this is the answer. Can you see the red line intersects the green line at 90%? I've got my video screen is covering that, but I think, can you see that? So that would be 90% of entitlements would be there. So the challenge is how late or how soon do you make that line? If you make it too early, people are going to be disappointed because a lot of their pensions aren't there. If you make it too late, then you're not going to get dashboards very soon. So the key challenge is that white wording there. What do you tell people about what's not there at the point you launch dashboards? I think the language I use is people are going to be disappointed. So suppose one of my most material pensions is with one of these small schemes. I'm going to be disappointed. Dashboards are going to disappoint people, but we've got to find the right DAP that disappoints the fewest number of people the least. I would have to say, when we did the call for input last year on data, the headline was push the DAP to the right. Sorry, Chris. Sorry, Minister, because obviously the Minister wants the DAP to the left. So we're going to find a mutually balanced, appropriate point that says it's the right point when enough entitlements are findable. I think what I would probably say, don't want to lead the witness on this, is we know Gen X's are going to be coming on, and we know Gen X's main wealth is in their deferred DB from the 1980s and 90s. So we probably need to make sure that is on. Don't know, just saying. Right, so that's the concept of largest first and the DAP. Let's talk about the waves. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but just to say, wave 1 is large schemes. There's going to be a 2-year window from April 23 to March 25 for all large schemes with 1,000 members. There's 3 cohorts within that. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Wave 2 is medium schemes. That's 100 to 999 members. They're going to start in that timeline, but probably run on later than April 25. And then you've got those micros. Remember those 28,000 in that bottom row in the table? They're probably not going to be in the 2-year window. They're probably going to be later. Who knows? Maybe never. I think there's a bit of an argument. These are like relevant small schemes. You know, there's a bit of an argument. Maybe these folk are more engaged with their pensions. Maybe they don't really need dashboards. If there's evidence on that you've got, then please send that out, send that in. I'm going to focus on wave 1 because that's where I think most PLSA member schemes are at. That's broken down to 3 cohorts. Look at the right-hand side, master trusts and FCA regulated. So this is contract-based provision. So GPPs, group SIPs, that sort of thing. And also individuals, personal pensions, individual SIPs. They're going to be in the first tranche starting in 23. Then large DC, this is cohort 2 within wave 1. Large DC that's also used for auto enrolment, starting a little bit later, but again, probably starting in 23. And then everything else. So other large DC, DB, and public service. And can you see that those 3 cohorts within wave 1 would get you to 99% of entitlements? DB would probably start in 23. There isn't any more detail, is there, Chris, on the how it would actually be broken down? I think that's where government is looking for insights. What's really interesting for me, having been on the inside of government, now sort of on industry, I sort of got a bit of an insight about what will be helpful to government. So that's where we're really looking to build the PLSA response with evidence. The more we can feed in evidence, and please do, all of you on the call, with evidence about how your scheme will be affected, that will help government opine on what the actual staging should be. So those are the waves. Now let's zoom in a little bit further on wave 1. So 68% of memberships coming from master trusts. Obviously that's the massive, the giants, Nest, People's, Now Pensions, etc. And also, you know, the commercial master trust, legal and general, etc. Those sorts of things. That's starting April 23. Then the large DC used for AE from 23, very governmental word, from. And then the 99% coming from everything else that's over 1,000 members. Who exactly is that? Well, it's 36 authorised master trusts, 124 contract-based providers, and about 1,300 other schemes. I suspect most of you on the call today are in that 30. I think we may have some master trust on the call, James. Yeah, and also some. Maybe I don't know if we've got any contract-based providers, but I think most of the organisations on the call today will be in that 1,300. Right, this is the end. This is my last slide. Okay, so you've got, what were the 3 C's? You've got to connect, you've got to compare your records and convey the information if you do a positive match, and then you've got a staging timeline. I find the best way to communicate with stuff is like examples, like how would that work for me? So let's assume we're a scheme that's got a staging date of the 1st of July 23. Okay, here is how it might play out. Okay, so what you've got across the top there is the rest of 21 and 22 and 23. Down the left, you've got row 0 is the development of the legislative framework that Chris has been talking about. And then you've got 1, 2, 3. What have I got to do about connecting? What have I got to do about comparing? And what have I got to do about conveying the correct information? Okay, top right, staged introduction of compulsion kicking in from April 23, apologies, with a DAP for us in July. Okay, staging call for input. Right now, you need to feedback on that. That will deliver regs 0.2 in December, and those will be consulted on. That will come out in July 22. You could say to me, Richard, we've got GMPs to sort, we've got McLeod to do, we're busy. If this is July 22, can't we think about it then? I would say probably no. You need to be discussing your connection strategy with your admin provider. You need to know 1.2, when are they going to be volunteering? Are they in fact volunteering? If they're not, perhaps you need to encourage them to, because by the time you need to stage, they need to be up and running. Next year, you need to be planning with them. How are you going to connect me? Should I volunteer with you? I need to sign an amended contract with you for the ISP services. That needs to be up and running. Then you need to work with them ahead of your staging date. And obviously you need to be connected from your staging date. On the personal data side of things, read the PASA guidance, read the PDP guidance. That will tell you to assess the digital accessibility of all your records. The PwC research said many schemes and providers haven't even got all their records on a system. You need to get all your records onto a system and then look at the accuracy of the personal data items you've got. Then in 22, you need to understand, what am I going to match on? Can I use industry standards? And then you need to make a plan how you're going to maintain the accuracy of all those personal data items. You need to prepare to data match, and then you obviously need to start comparing your records 2.5 from your staging date, in this case, July 23. The little bit of uncertainty is on conveying the right information. You definitely will need to send back an accrued pension amount. So definitely make sure you've got accrued pension amounts. On the future, estimated retirement income in the future, watch this space. Chris has said there's more stuff coming there. Look out in future PLSA events for more updates on that, the annual conference, etc. But there'll be more settlement on that as we go through. And obviously you'll need to prepare those view amounts before your staging date and start and get ready to return them. So this is what you need to do right now. It's my final slide. You need to feed back your thoughts on the timescales. Email Craig and me with your thoughts. As Nigel said, we've got a coordination group. We're working hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks to put together PLSA's response that will go to Chris and the team very early July. We will possibly need to reach out to PLSA members with a survey, so please look out for that. If we need to ask some ancillary members, we need to get evidence. PASA, as Nigel mentioned, is also doing a survey. Just go to the PASA website. There's a link on there on the homepage, or do all three. If you've only got 10 minutes, please do that. Point 2, look at the data hub, look at the data standards, look at the data hub on Chris's website, and also look at PASA guidance. And that will say, talk to your administrator. If I was a pension, I've been a pensions manager, I would say, phone your administrator after this and say, when are you going to help me? When are you volunteering? How are you going to help me? And what are your plans? And are we going to be okay? Oh, and by the way, just because they connect, they've discharged their duty to you, but who's going to sort this problem about false negatives and false positives? Is that their problem or is that your problem? All to be talked through. And that's the 4th point. How are you going to help me with the accuracy of my personal data, and how are you going to ensure with me that I've got accrued data for all my records?
Richard, thank you. That is a lot of material you've got through there. We've just got a few minutes left. We've got some questions. I'm going to go straight to Chris. Chris, we've got a question from Kevin Smith, who says very simply, how much is all this costing and who's going to pay?
I can answer the second part of that question. Unfortunately, I can't answer the first one. There's a lot of commercial sensitivity, of course, around the central architecture and who's going to be providing the pension finder service and how much that's going to cost over the term of the contract. But safe to say, we'll be doing all we can to ensure value for money alongside with all the guidance we get in central government around spending public money to make sure it is as cost efficient as possible. In terms of who pays, so we are now funded by central government. But the cost for the pensions dashboard programme comes from a combination of the financial services levy and the pensions levy. At the moment, that's where it comes from. So I guess indirectly, the money is coming in from the industry through the levies, and part of the levy that's being paid is being used to fund the pensions dashboard programme.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, James, I think it's probably worth adding. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of costs for schemes as well. And that's one of the things we're going to be exploring over the next few weeks now that we've got greater clarity about the timeline. It's one of the things I really want to understand, whether adjusting the timeline or the approach can make a substantially difference to the cost. And it's something I plan to be feeding back, not just to Chris, but also to DWP.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, very important issue, obviously. Now, looking at the questions, Matthew Trueblood has fired in quite a lot of questions, actually, but all about the data issue, essentially. So if I can sort of try and combine, Matthew, a couple of your questions, forgive me for doing that. He asks about deferred members. You know, the deferred members, the data all comes, or sometimes, not very often, doesn't come from the member. What do we do? What should we do about the inaccuracy of that data? And he also asks, could our legal advisor just say, there isn't a way we could comply with the law? Richard, I think that's probably one for you.
I think that's fantastic questions. I think all of us in industry need to find good ways, working with third-party data providers. A number of schemes I know have gone out to third-party data providers to look at the accuracy of their data. This is the truth of pensions admin that all of us who work in the pensions admin know. And I think perhaps others who haven't done admin haven't really understood. So we need to find a way. But frankly, we need to have correct data on our deferred records. And I would say, actually, I think dashboards are mainly about deferreds. I think actives generally know where their active pension is because they're employed and they're currently in it. I think it's about, particularly the Gen X's right now, have got multiple 3, 4, 5 deferred. So I think we all need to work as an industry and finding the best practice for getting data accurate. I'm not sure about the lawyers saying you can't comply. I think that's a thing that's going to work through. I would be putting my money on the volunteers. Chris has mentioned there's going to be volunteers. I think all of us need to look, and I would advocate for all of you to push your administrators and software providers to get volunteering in 2022 to learn about all of these things so we can roll out what they've learned across the whole of the industry. Automatic enrolment was got to work by the biggest employers. Do you remember that in 2012, 2013 with their payroll providers? I'm sure this is going to be the same way. The earliest adopters are going to find the ways to make this work, and then we need to take that learning and roll it out across industry.
Okay, thanks, Richard. And perhaps one last question, and I think it's probably for Chris. How confident can we be that dashboards are not just going to be the next tool for unscrupulous scammers?
So a really good question, and I think that the one thing we can be certain of is they will be targeted by scammers, as every part of the pension system is targeted by scammers, and we have to be very aware that, as well as being really helpful for consumers to get all their information in one place, it does also create vulnerabilities for the consumer in doing that. So we are very aware that they will be targeted, and so it's up to us to make sure that the people are defended as best as possible from the scammers. And there are a number of ways in which we're doing that. Firstly, as Nigel pointed out, there's a really strong role for the FCA and the regulatory environment in here. And they're going to be working hard to make sure that dashboards and the providers of dashboards are currently expected to make it a regulated activity. So there will be a lot of oversight from the FCA in what's happening there. So secondly, dashboards are not expected to be transactional. So people will not be able to transfer money through a pensions dashboard. And if they are transferring money, then obviously they're not on a pensions dashboard. And so I'll have to an education part in there in doing that. And I think what's really important for us is going to be looking at that, the way in which pensions dashboards interact with the existing infrastructure around here. So they're already, I guess, planners and through IFAs or through guidance tools. We need to make sure that individuals have that right kind of idea of authority and consent to know exactly what they're doing and who they're doing it with at any point in time. So it will become, I think, an important part of the landscape, and we'll have to deal with the scams in exactly the same way as we're dealing with the scams that we're currently facing.
So many thanks again, Chris, Nigel, Richard. Great job, guys. Thanks for putting all this material together and putting it across so well. Thanks also to everyone who's dialed in, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.